Today's episode is a heaping dose of reality. The government absolutely loves inflation. They need inflation, you're trapped in the system, and there's no way out. I'll explain why the US government loves inflation, why they act like they don't like it, and I'll also lay out my long-term plan to survive it and even benefit from it. I'm Jason Kish, I'm in the commercial real estate investing space, and this is your dose of inflation reality. First, let's talk about how we got here and why every major civilization, without exception, eventually ends up here. Let's start with America's monetary history. In 1972, the US introduced the Coinage Act. So that authorized the US to issue its first gold and silver coins. And that established the US dollar and our bimetallic standard, which is gold and silver. So at this point, 1 ounce of gold was worth $20. In 1913, we introduced the Federal Reserve Act. That created the Federal Reserve System, which is what we still use today as the nation's central bank. It was intended to avert financial panics by acting as the lender of last resort. And if you haven't read Creature from Jekyll Island, you absolutely have to read it, and buckle up because it's a really long read. In 1933, this is probably the most important piece here. Well, one of them, as you'll hear, the New Deal banking reforms. This is where President Roosevelt confiscated all the gold from citizens, which effectively ended the domestic gold standard. Once that gold was confiscated, he revalued it from that $20 an ounce, which had been in effect from 1792, which was about 150 years, and repriced it from $20 to $35 an ounce once it was all confiscated from the citizens. So that devalued our dollar in that one move by about 60%. In the wake of World War II, the Allied nations tied their currencies to the US dollar, which, as I mentioned, was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Those US dollars could be converted to gold at any time, and the dollar became the foundation of the world's monetary system. America took advantage of this immense privilege that we had, and of course, printed more money than we had in gold reserves. So in the 1960s, the French president, Charles de Gaulle, he started exchanging massive amounts of US dollars for gold, and then transported or repatriated that gold back to France. So in 1971, after all this gold was moving out of America, Richard Nixon had no choice but to end the convertibility of the US dollar. So this officially dissolved the Bretton Woods system, which was again set up in the 1940s, and it shifted the US to a purely fiat currency, which means that it's a currency backed by nothing physical. The gold standard was like the string holding down a helium balloon on inflation. Once that string is cut, the sky's the limit. The American Empire is not the only one to go this route. The Roman Empire, the Yuan dynasty, the Weimar Republic, the British Empire, and countless others have debased their currencies to fund wars, government projects, pay debts, and really just fund the overspending that large governments, large empires tend to get into. Now that we use fiat currency tied to nothing, the US government's free to print absolutely any amount of money that they want. Need to fund a war? Print money. We have a financial crisis? Print money. Social Security's failing. Let's print money. There's a pandemic? Shut everything down and then print money. We run a $2 trillion deficit every year? No problem. Let's print money. So do you see the pattern there? The cumulative impact on this is absolutely insane when you add year after year after year. Buckle up for this. Measured in gold, which was our form of money for the first, almost 200 years of the US existence, the value of the dollar has fallen over 99% against gold since 1971. So think about that, 99% in only 55 years. This is what no politician will tell you though. The government needs and loves inflation. They're incentivized to run inflation as hot as they can without spurring the populace to action. That really is the key. Creating unrest and risking their political position is really what keeps the lid on inflation. And why do they like it? Well, it's for two main reasons. If you owe $39 trillion, which is our current national debt, you want to pay that in devalued dollars. I'm going to actually talk to you about how you can personally do this through inflation-induced debt destruction a little bit later in the video, and you can benefit yourself that way. The other reason that the government loves inflation is that they can generate tax revenue off of something that hasn't actually increased in value. It's really free revenue to them. Here are a couple examples. So you buy an ounce of gold for $4,000. the gold goes up to $10,000 because of inflation. It's still just an ounce of gold. You didn't really get any kind of additional value or anything. It's still 1 ounce of that metal. Well, if you go to sell it, you're going to be hit with a $6,000 capital gains. You need to pay taxes on that. So that's one example for you. And by the way, there are tons of examples. I'm just trying to give you some realistic ones. Here's another situation. You buy a $500,000 piece of land. Nothing changes with development of the land. It's not in the path of progress. It doesn't actually become more desirable or valuable or anything, but inflation runs as it normally does. Let's just say its value is $1 million in 20 years. You go to sell that piece of land, you're going to have to pay capital gains on $500,000 because inflation made the dollar-denominated value of it go up by $500,000. I could give you examples all day about how the US government benefits from inflation, so you have to ask yourself, even if they had the ability, why would they possibly stop? This is why I consider myself an inflation bull. I think that every single decade will be inflationary until the dollar no longer exists and is replaced with another currency. Now, I don't know when that will be, and obviously we'll have years of lower inflation, maybe even deflation. But I really think when you zoom out and look at it at the decades level, we'll see very consistent inflation because of the reasons that I brought up. And this really is why I'm always putting my money to work. I want to stay ahead of that dollar debasement. Investing feels risky, but there's nothing more risky than not investing. The last thing that I would want to see for somebody that I care about is work hard their whole lives, inflation runs away from them, and they start to fall further and further behind as their purchasing power erodes. So as housing inflates, clothing costs inflate, energy costs inflate, and food costs inflate, you really want to own the housing and stock of companies that provide products and services that keep getting more and more expensive, because then you at least enjoy the increasing value of those assets. No one has a crystal ball, and I certainly don't claim to, but I'm staying invested in the stock market, and I'm involved in real estate investing from a few different angles. The stock market has been killing it since 2020, and I know that there have been a couple bumps along the way, of course. I'm pretty concerned about the current valuation, so I'm not all in on the stock market. But I'll always keep a certain amount of exposure to it because really timing the stock market is not a very successful endeavor. Real estate's my favorite asset type for a few reasons, but I'll talk about the concept that I teased a couple minutes ago, and I think that it's really, really powerful. And I believe Jason Hartman is the one that coined the phrase, or at least popularized it, and that's called inflation-induced debt destruction. So I'll show you what inflation-induced debt destruction looks like through an example. The example that I'm going to use right now is a rental property that rents out for $2,000 a month, and the initial cost of it is $250,000. So we'll do 20% down on it, and we'll assume an interest of 7%, and it'll be a 30-year loan. Let's start on a mortgage interest calculator and start plugging some numbers in. So the property costs $250,000. We're going to put 20% down, which is the equivalent of $50,000. So the loan amount is $200,000. We're going to do an interest rate of 7%, a little higher than usual, but that's because it's an investment property. Property tax on something like that, probably about $2,000. There's going to be no PMI on this. And home insurance at $1,500 a year, that seems about right. So let's calculate this. The monthly payment is $1,622 a month. But there are some additional expenses that need to be added here. So we do have to pay property management fee because we want this to be more of a passive investment. And we also need to add repairs and take some money out for vacancy. So we'll just consider vacancy like a cost instead of taking it away from the revenue. What we have is $2,000 a month in rent, but our initial payment is about $1,950. To be more exact on here, it's $1,946 a month are our monthly costs when you have the interest, the principal, and then those other costs that I mentioned. So you're really cash flowing about nothing on this one on a 30-year mortgage. It's not really a super exciting investment, but this is why I want to show you the power of the inflation-induced debt destruction that happens over time. Let's just assume 3.5% inflation, which, yeah, I know the Fed talks about 2% inflation, but I think we all know that they keep changing the numbers around to hide the true inflation. So the long-term increase in rents has been about 3.5% in the US. And same thing with the cost of properties. So we're going to use that 3.5% for both the rent and for the property values. So for the rent, we can just plug in $2,000 a month and monthly contribution nothing, because we're just trying to figure out how much rent's going to be. So we'll do it in 30 years. So the interest rate is 3.5%. You calculate that. Are you ready for this? Are you sure you're ready to see how much rent's going to be in 30 years? This computer is not quite ready for what the rent is going to be. It must be a big number. It's still calculating. The rent cost will be over $5,600 just using that 3.5%. It's amazing how much it grows over 30 years. So, of course, there will be some increases in costs on your expenses side as well. But what you have to remember is the principal and interest payments stay exactly the same on that mortgage. So those parts won't go up. Now what will go up is property management, repairs, things like that. So I actually made some of those changes on the cost side. Instead of the initial cost being around $1,950 a month as the landlord, your costs will go up to about $3,050 a month using that 3.5% growth on those expenses that I was talking about. So if you think about this though, that growth is nothing compared to the $2,000 growing to $5,600. So it'll go from almost no cash flow to 29 years and 11 months out, you'll be at $2,500 a month in cash flow, including with those increased expenses. That's the power of inflation-induced debt destruction. Now, the power of real estate is the fact that somebody is paying off your mortgage. The reason I said 29 years and 11 months is after 30 years, that thing's paid off. Now you're going to be getting closer to $3,800 a month in cash flow. This is something that somebody else paid for, and you got almost no cash flow at the beginning of it. Now, the other thing to mention and why I love real estate is not only did somebody pay this thing off, not only do you have pretty big cash flow at this point, now the value of that property went from $250,000 initially to over $700,000 in the 30 years that you've held it. So that is the concept of inflation-induced debt destruction, but it also goes to show you the real inflation that's going to happen. That property went from $250,000 to $700,000 in 30 years, and you found a way to profit from it along the way. Now, a crash or a recession can happen at any moment. So I'm not going to tell you that stock prices are low right now or real estate prices are low right now or that anything really feels cheap, because a lot of things do feel expensive. But I've literally put all my money on the fact that I think that asset prices will climb over the long term, because the government doesn't just tolerate inflation, it loves inflation. And that really is the point of this video. I'm hoping that this video at least challenges some of your current assumptions and makes you look critically at your financial game plan. If you're just crossing your fingers and hoping that inflation goes away, I'd get to work instead using it to your advantage. Please like and subscribe because it helps this channel immensely. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.